My name is Pastor Dave, and we are in the second week of our series called 7-Day March, Believing the Promise Before the Walls Fall. This is a look at the first 6 chapters of the book of Joshua. And we started last week. So last week we looked at Joshua chapter 1. We learned that Joshua was called into leadership. We talked with bad grammar. We talked about him being commissioned with God, and that God gives him some instructions, but then God also tells him the things that God is going to do. And so we see it's not just him being commissioned into service, but that God was right alongside him. And the Israelites, Joshua's now the leader, they are on the edge of the Jordan River. They're about to go and claim the promise. And in chapter 2, we're going to see how Joshua begins to prepare them and to be prepared for what that looks like, what it means to actually take hold of the promise for them. And we're gonna see in there that there's actually some great overlap between what he does in that time and what we should do in our time. And we're gonna see that there's also some overlap with what Joshua was doing and how Jesus was also sending his followers out. And in turn, what that looks like for us. So Joshua chapter 2, if you see the slide on the screen, you'll see a little piece of comic book history. If you know what that is, maybe you are from my generation, and if you don't know what that is, it's Spy versus Spy. It's a little strip that was featured in Mad Magazine from my teen years. If you don't know what that is, don't bother looking it up, but if you know, you know. Anyway, Joshua chapter 2, let me read it to you. Then Joshua secretly sent out 2 spies from the Israelite camp at a great acacia grove. He instructed them scout out the land on the other side of the Jordan River, especially around Jericho. So the 2 men set out and came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there that night. But someone told the king of Jericho, some Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab, bring out the men who have come into your house, for they have come here to spy out the whole land. Rahab had hidden the 2 men, but she replied, yes, the men were here earlier, but I didn't know where they were from. They left town at dusk as the gates were about to close. I don't know where they went. If you hurry, you can probably catch up with them. Actually, she had taken them up on the roof and hidden them beneath bundles of flax she had laid out. So the king's men went looking for the spies along the road leading to the shallow crossing of the Jordan River. As soon as the king's men had left, the gate of Jericho was shut. Before the spies went to sleep that night, Rahab went up onto the roof to talk with them. I know the Lord has given you this land, she told them. We are all afraid of you. Everyone in the land is living in terror, for we have heard how the Lord made a dry path for you through the Red Sea, whose people, and we know that what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 Amorite kings east of the Jordan River, whose people you completely destroyed. No wonder our hearts have melted in fear. No one has the courage to fight after hearing such things. For the Lord your God is the supreme God of the heavens and above and the earth below. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will be kind to me and my family since I have helped you. Give me some guarantee that when Jericho is conquered, you will let me live along with my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all their families. We offer our own lives as a guarantee for your safety, the men agreed. If you don't betray us, we will keep our promise and be kind to you when the Lord gives us the land. Then, since Rahab's house was built into the town wall, she let them down by a rope through the window. Escape to the hill country, she told them. Hide there for 3 days from the men searching for you. Then, when they have returned, you can go on your way. Before they left, the men told her, we will be bound by the oath we have taken if only you follow these instructions. When we come into the land, you must leave this scarlet rope hanging from the window through which you let us down. And all of your family members, your father, mother, brothers, and all your relatives must be here inside the house. If they go out into the street and are killed, it will not be our fault. But if anyone lays a hand on the people inside this house, we will accept the responsibility for their death. If you betray us, however, we are not bound by this oath in any way. "I accept your terms," she replied, and she sent them on their way, leaving the scarlet rope hanging from the window. The spies went up into the hill country and stayed there 3 days. The men who were chasing them searched everywhere along the road, but they finally returned without success. Then the 2 spies came down from the hill country, crossed the Jordan River, and reported to Joshua all that had happened to them. "The Lord has given us the whole land," they said, "for all the people in the land are terrified of us." And the chapter ends. Now, what's going on? Joshua, who is the newly commissioned leader, is getting ready they need to cross for them to see the promise fulfilled, for them to take hold of the promise of God, they have to cross the Jordan River and face the enemy. They have to cross the Jordan River and go into the land and take possession of it. And it's going to require fighting. It's going to require them physically going and doing stuff. They got to strap their swords on, lace up their boots. They have to go do it. And so Joshua, who appears to be kind of military minded, he wants to know what they're getting into. See, and so first he recognizes they have an enemy. And right off the bat in the story, we can pull that truth out when Joshua recognized their enemy, and we can ask ourselves, do we have any similarities to that? Do we have an enemy? Right? Joshua is facing an enemy. How about myself? Recognize your enemy. So who is your enemy? Well, as we learn in Scripture, 1 Peter 5:8 says this: "Stay alert, watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour." So, like Joshua, you and I are also facing an enemy. Like Joshua, before we can claim the promises of God, there's an enemy in our path. The devil, trying to prevent us. And the same, like for Joshua, the people in Jericho, for Joshua to claim the promise meant that the people of Jericho would be defeated. So they didn't want Joshua to claim the promise. Recognize your enemy. Joshua recognized theirs. The next thing that Joshua did is he sent the spies out. He went to scout the land. He wanted to know the landscape. He wanted to know what the mindset was of the people there. He wanted to know, are they preparing for battle? Are they ready to fight us? Are they living in fear? What's going on? Are their cities walled? What is it? He wanted to know. He wanted to scout the land. What about us? See, the Bible tells us a lot about our enemy, the devil. And I think that for us, it's important for us to know. It's important for us to, in a sense, scout the land. Right? If we have this enemy, the devil, how does he attack us? What does he do? Scout the land. The Bible has a lot of stories and examples. And if we study them and if we know them, if we read them, we can pull the truths out of there and understand this is how the enemy, this is how he worked in this story. Does he still work that way today? And is he trying to work that way in my own life? So I can be prepared for that. Right? And when you go all the way back to the beginning with Adam and Eve and the devil comes to them and he twists the truth. That's what he does. He's a deceiver. So if I know that, it's like I'm scouting the land and I'm aware of the fact that he is going to try to use different methods and different means to try to just twist the truth a little bit. To get me to believe a little lie. To get me to be deceived. To be confused about what God's intention, what God's truth is, what's correct, what's proper. Like he will twist the truth. But if I scout the land, if I'm aware of that, I can do what 1 Peter 5:8 says, and I can stay alert. I can watch out for my great enemy. Joshua sent spies to scout the land. For us, I think if we dive into Scripture, if we study the stories where the enemy, our great enemy, the devil, was at work, it's like we're scouting the land. We're becoming aware of how he works. See, the reason Joshua sent the spies in is they were putting together, and God's going to, of course, give them a lot of the details, but they're putting together this plan. How are we going to go and take the promised land? How are we going to do this? They were getting prepared. And I think the Bible tells us, like Joshua was preparing those people, the Bible tells us to be prepared as well. And I'm going to use just this illustration. I think it's important for us to be parachute minded. Right? Now I've never gone skydiving, so I know very little about it. I know that if you don't use a parachute, you generally smack the ground a lot harder and you die. And that if you use a parachute and everything goes all right, you survive, you live, you have a gentle landing and you can do it again. Now, I've looked into skydiving, I've wanted to go skydiving, but then I look at the price tag and I'm always like too much of a cheapskate for it. But if you have an extra ticket you want to give me, I'll go skydiving. See, we need to be parachute minded. Right? To be parachute minded is to understand that when you jump out of a plane, it takes preparation. You've got to have the parachute. You've got to know how the parachute operates. It's got to be folded right. You got to know where the ripcord is. You got to know when to pull the ripcord. There's all this sort of stuff you need to know so that when you jump out of the plane, you'll land on the ground and live. When we face our enemy, like Joshua was facing theirs, it's important to have a plan put together so that when you face that enemy, when you smack up against it, you live. Your faith survives. See, 1 Peter 1:13 tells us, so prepare your minds for action and exercise self-control. Put all your hope in the gracious salvation that will come to you when Jesus Christ is revealed to the world. We've got to be prepared. Joshua was preparing the people. He was scouting the land. He was sending the spies. He was putting together he was getting prepared so that they could go and take the promise. And they were working in lockstep with God. And in chapter 1, God had told Joshua certain things, but then God also tells Joshua what he is going to do. And we actually see that God says he's going to do more things than he even asked Joshua to do. And they're right there, about to go and take the promise. Generations of hope are resting on the bank of the Jordan River. And when they cross over and begin to take the land, they're going to see a promise fulfilled that generations have been looking forward to. They're there and they're getting prepared to harvest the promise. Right? Oftentimes we think of promises of just like, if something's promised to you, it's just gonna like show up in your mailbox, or it's just gonna happen. And that might be true sometimes. But for the Israelites, the promise of that land, it didn't happen without them putting their boots and swords on and following God in obedience and taking the land. For them, the promise actually had to be harvested. Right? I live in Iowa. I'm not a farmer, but I live in Iowa, and so I know farmers. I hear them talk about it. I hear talk about all the stuff on the radio, the weather. They're always talking about it. And what I know is it's you have to prepare the field, and you have to plant the field. But then, when the time is right, when the rain and the sun have done their things, and the corn or the beans have grown, then you have this other last step, right? You have to harvest. Harvest is really important. Like, it would be just a lot of work for nothing if all you did is prepare the field, if all you did is plant the field, unless you go and harvest. And so Joshua and the Israelites, it's as if their time in the wilderness, their time with Moses, their time of them receiving the law and all of that sort of stuff, it's as if they have prepared the field and planted the field, and now they're on the bank of the river ready to harvest the promise. It's going to be work. It's going to require them to go and to fight. It's going to require them to face their enemy, to know their enemy. That's why they scouted the land. That's why they've prepared. That's why they put a plan together. That's why God's going to help them put a plan together for when they face Jericho. That's chapter 6. It's still a few weeks away. You'll find out what happens to Rahab when we get to chapter 6. Or you can read ahead if you need to. But for them, the promise had to be harvested. They had to go and and put work into it. But God was going to keep his part of the promise. God was going to be there. He was going to be with them. He wouldn't abandon them. He wouldn't fail them. Jesus talks a lot about harvest. There's this section in Matthew 9 and 10 where Jesus is talking about harvest, and oftentimes in the Gospels and with Jesus, they talk about harvest, and they're not talking. It's an agricultural term to describe a spiritual condition. He's relating to them because they understand harvest, and he's letting them know that there are people who are spiritually hungry, who want to know that they've met Jesus, that they're ready for the good news. They know their brokenness, they know their sinfulness, and they just want to know the good news. They want to have the news of Jesus be given to them, and they're ready to accept it. And so Jesus is going through the land, and he is encountering these people who are spiritually hungry. They're so ready to meet him. They're so ready to be told the good news. They're so ready to be offered forgiveness because they've lived with their sin. They've lived in that, and it's not satisfying. And so Jesus talks in terms of harvest and how the time is now, and these people are ready to receive the hope of salvation. It's time to harvest. It's time to go and do the work so that the people can hear the good news, and there can be this harvest of souls. And in chapter 9, Jesus begins to describe this. It says, Jesus traveled through all the towns and villages of that area, teaching in the synagogues and announcing the good news about the kingdom. And he healed every kind of disease and illness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. He said to his disciples, "The harvest is great, but the workers are few. So pray to the Lord who is in charge of the harvest. Ask him to send more workers into his fields." And then it's going to turn into chapter 10. That's the end of chapter 9 in the Gospel of Matthew. And Jesus is about to see that prayer answered. And he's about to send his disciples at the time. He's about to send his followers at the time. He's going to send them out to be the workers of the harvest. See, they have been following Jesus. They have been witnessing Jesus do the work of harvest. They have seen Jesus preach the good news. They have heard him say the words. They have seen him have compassion and heal the sick and cast out demons. They've been witness to all of that. But to follow Jesus is to go beyond just encountering or seeing or knowing about it. It's about becoming people who can now do it. See, to follow Jesus is to figure out how to turn nouns into verbs. It is not enough to simply know what love is. We must show love. It's not enough to know what the concept of compassion is. We must show compassion. It's not enough to just have the spiritual insights. We must put them into practice. It's not good enough to just know the theology, to know about God. We must show a visible example of God through the way we live. And Jesus, like Joshua, is about to send people out to begin harvest. Matthew chapter 10, I'm going to read it from the Message. I like the Message. It's a paraphrase, not a translation, so it gives a great flavor of what's going on. The prayer was no sooner prayed than it was answered. Jesus called 12 of his followers and sent them into the ripe fields. He gave them power to kick out the evil spirits and to tenderly care for the bruised and hurt lives. This is the list of the 12 he sent. Simon, they called him Peter or Rock. Andrew, his brother. James, Zebedee's son. John, his brother. Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas. Matthew, the taxman. James, son of Alphaeus. Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite. Judas Iscariot, who later turned on him. And you could go ahead and put your name there too. I know Jesus is talking to these group of people in that time, but what he's about to tell them, the instructions he is about to give them, are also true for us. See, in the end of Matthew, Jesus is going to give them, when we talked about this last week, what the Bible often calls the Great Commission. He is going to send them out to preach the good news. He's going to send them out to go and baptize and to tell people about him, about Jesus. And that Great Commission, and we talked about with bad grammar last week, how it is a co-mission where he is with us as we go out and do this thing. He is with us as we go and try to spread the good news about Jesus and how he can forgive us of our sins. He can set us free from the sin. He can heal our brokenness. Jesus knows he's going to send his disciples out for that when he goes. But we're in chapter 10, not chapter 28. And so what's happening here is Jesus is essentially preparing them for 28 by giving them the instructions here and letting them put it into practice in a smaller, shorter time frame. He's going to send them out and they're going to come back in a little span of time. And then later, Jesus is going to go back to the Father, and the mission is completely theirs. And in turn, completely ours. See, the harvest is ripe. People are waiting to hear the good news. There are people who need to know the grace that has been given to you. They need to know what it's like and how it works and how it saved you and what it's done in your life. And it's our job to be able to go and share that. But it's hard sometimes. You have to have a plan sometimes. Sometimes you got to scout the land. You got to know the enemy. You got to do the background work to see success. Much like Joshua was preparing people to harvest the promise, that's what Jesus is doing here. Let me read it for you. Continue reading it. Jesus sent his 12 harvest hands out with this charge. Don't begin by traveling to some far-off place to convert unbelievers, and don't try to be dramatic by tackling some public enemy. Go to the lost, confused people right here in the neighborhood. Tell them that the kingdom is here. Bring health to the sick, raise the dead, touch the untouchables, kick out the demons. You've been treated generously, so live generously. Don't think you have to put on a fundraising campaign before you start. You don't need a lot of equipment. You are the equipment. And all you need to keep that going is 3 meals a day. Travel light. When you enter a town or village, don't insist on staying in a luxury inn. Get a modest place with some modest people and be content there until you leave. When you knock on a door, be courteous in your greeting. If they welcome you, be gentle in your conversation. If they don't welcome you, quietly withdraw. Don't make a scene. Shrug your shoulders and be on your way. You can be sure that on Judgment Day, they'll be mighty sorry. But it's no concern of yours now. Stay alert. This is hazardous work I'm assigning you to. You're going to be like sheep running through a wolf pack, so don't call attention to yourselves. Be as shrewd as a snake and offensive as a dove. Don't be naive. Some people will question your motives. Others will smear your reputation just because you believe in me. Don't be upset when they haul you before the civil authorities without knowing that they've done you and me a favor, giving you a platform for preaching the good news, the kingdom news. And don't worry about what you'll say or how you'll say it. The right words will be there. The Spirit of your Father will supply the words. When people realize it is the living God you are presenting and not some idol that makes them feel good, they are going to turn on you, even people in your own family. There's a great irony here, proclaiming so much love, experiencing so much hate. But don't quit, don't cave in. It is all well worth it in the end. It is not success you are after in such times, but survival. Be survivors. Before you've run out of options, the Son of Man will have arrived. A student doesn't get a better desk than her teacher. A laborer doesn't make more money than his boss. Be content, pleased, even when you, my students, my harvest hands, get the same treatment I get. If they call me the master, dung face, what can the workers expect? Don't be intimidated. Eventually, everything is going to be out in the open and everyone will know how things really are. So don't hesitate to go public now. Don't be bluffed into silence by the threats of bullies. There's nothing they can do to your soul, your core being. Save your fear for God who holds your entire life, body, and soul in his hands. What's the price of a pet canary? Some loose change, right? And God cares what happens to it even more than you do. He pays even greater attention to you, down to the last detail, even numbering the hairs on your head. So don't be intimidated by all this bully talk. You're worth more than 1,000,000 canaries. Stand up for me against world opinion, and I'll stand up for you before my Father in heaven. If you turn tail and run, do you think I'll cover for you? Don't think I've come to make life cozy. I've come to cut, to make a sharp knife cut between son and father, daughter and mother, bride and mother-in-law. Cut through these cozy domestic arrangements and free you for God. Well-meaning family members can be your worst enemies. If you prefer father or mother over me, you don't deserve me. If you prefer son or daughter over me, you don't deserve me. If you don't go all the way with me through thick and thin, you don't deserve me. If your first concern is to look after yourself, you'll never find yourself. But if you forget about yourself and look to me, you'll find both yourself and me. We are intimately linked in this harvest work. Anyone who accepts what you do accepts me, the one who sent you. Anyone who accepts what I do accepts my Father who sent me. Accepting a messenger of God is as good as being God's messenger. Accepting someone's help is as good as giving someone help. This is a large work I've called you into. Don't be overwhelmed by it. It's best to start small. Give a cool cup of water to someone who is thirsty, for instance. The smallest act of giving or receiving makes you a true apprentice. You won't lose out on a thing. And so Jesus sends his followers out. He gives them the instructions for the mission. It's harvest time. It's time to go and claim the promise. It's time to understand that like Joshua, we have been commissioned with Jesus. And part of that is to understand that this mission requires of us to understand and know some things and to do some things. Or this mission of going and harvesting souls. Like Jesus is using these agricultural terms to describe the spiritual conditions and how people were ready to hear the good news and accept the good news. And we've been given this mission. In Joshua's time, their mission was to go in and take the land and receive and harvest the promise. And our mission is to go out and spread the good news. But to do that, we need to, like Joshua, we should scout the land. We should know our enemy. We should be prepared. We should have a plan in place. And in a lot of ways, that's what Jesus is doing here. He's giving them the plan. He's scouted the land and he's telling them, this is what it's like. This is what it's been like for me. This is what it'll be like for you. You have an enemy. You're going to encounter people who will bully you and mistreat you and smear your reputation. But go anyways, because there are those who are ready and waiting to hear about the grace of Jesus. They're ready to accept the good news. The promise is ready to be harvested. Like in Joshua's time, we must go and do it. Joshua and the Israelites, in the coming chapters, they're going to cross the river and step into the promised land. And we will see that it's not all easy. We will see that it requires obedience, and it requires them to follow God, and it requires them to have a sword and to use a sword, and that it's seeing the promise fulfilled sometimes requires us to go and do like it did for them. But like God had promised to them that he would not abandon them, that he'd be with them, Jesus has also told us the same things. We are commissioned with Jesus. It's time for us to scout the land to know our enemy. Put a plan together because the harvest is ready.